Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the weekly update with Oakwood Financial Group. I'm Joshua Dobi. Thank you so much for continuing to embrace this medium during this time of COVID-19. I want so very much to meet with so many of you in person and to get caught up on all the things that have been going on here these last several months. But during this time of restriction and when mandate is in place and recommending that we stay at a distance, I really do appreciate your willingness to engage this video medium, and I'm going to do my very best to give you, hopefully, some relevant information on what's happening in the world around us. I don't need to tell you, if you've watched just about any news program of any shape, size, and variety, here over the last couple of weeks, things continue to move in a very dynamic way. Some of it is information that I've mentioned to you before. Other parts you're going to hear are somewhat new, and even over the next week or two, especially from a legislative standpoint, we're anticipating some pretty rapid developments. I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes, just in terms of what we see at this point. But a couple of information points, data points, if you will, that you may want to keep in mind. Don't want to get too wonky or too far into the weeds as far as our analysis is concerned, but these are points that we believe are significantly relevant in indicating where we are as an economy and the kinds of things that may happen going forward. First has to do with unemployment claims. They continue to remain pretty stubbornly high. About 1.4 million this week, which was about the same as last week in terms of new claims. Continuing claims, meaning those folks who have been on unemployment insurance for at least a week, crept back up from 16 million up to 17 million here this past week. Still a huge number when you look at it from an historical context. Now, that has been mitigated somewhat off of the highs that we saw here over 2 months ago, when we saw continuing claims at over 25 million and new claims up over 5 million. But you have to take that in context again, as in terms of the glass half full as well, in that this is not due, again, to a more natural economic pullback. These are businesses which have been required to reduce significantly and in many instances shut down completely due to government mandate. It's important to keep that in mind. It doesn't make the suffering any less, but it is a different indication, if you will, than, say, for example, and we have this conversation a lot with folks, 2008 and 2009. That was due to some pretty significant interior and foundational economic issues and financial issues, which had a rippling effect literally through our entire economy. Not the same here. These ramifications are different, and it's important to keep that in mind as we're slotting together what we anticipate could happen going forward. Another important point to keep in mind, unfortunately, here over the next week, literally in real time here at the time of this recording, we're going to have the elimination of the quote bonus unemployment insurance payout, which has been $600 a week here now for several months. Now, I'm going to caveat that a little bit because we're going to have some updated legislation coming through Congress which may address that in some way. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But at least as the law stands right now, this week, that $600 a week bonus unemployment, if you will, is going to go away. That's probably going to have a significant impact on our working force, meaning that folks who may have been staying out of the workforce during the time that they were receiving that bonus may be more inclined to go back into the workforce. We're going to watch that. We don't know how that's going to take its shape, especially if Congress passes new legislation that extends that or modifies that in such way. How is that going to encourage or discourage certain behaviors? So stay online for that. That's a big deal because that has been a bridge, certainly, but for folks who are receiving more on unemployment insurance than they were receiving working, not a whole lot of incentive to go back to work over these last couple of months. And that definitely is playing into the data that we're receiving on our end. So stay tuned on that. But as it sits right now, that's going to end at the end of this week. Another big point to keep in mind. Obviously, we're beyond tax filing season. Obviously, we're beyond the time when corporate returns generally are filed as well. But what does that mean overall for our small businesses? You've heard me talk a lot about the Small Business Association programs that have been out there, whether it's the P3 loans, the EIDLs, which have been put in place with the CARES Act legislation in order to be able to help a little bit in bridging, keeping folks on board. Those programs have become quiet, and actually there's a lot of discussion legislatively right now about whether to extend those programs or perhaps to look at something new altogether. So stay tuned for that as well. All right, you've heard me say it a couple of times now, legislation. Like I said, if you've literally looked at any news program here over the last couple of weeks, we're starting to get a lot of noise out of Washington, a lot of word from especially the Senate, which last week the Senate leader put on the floor the Senate majority's version of what they would like to see in this next round of COVID-19 related financial relief. Still being negotiated, nothing's in law yet, so again, continue to stay tuned on that. But some things that we're hearing from both sides of the political aisle, which look like they're going to be included. First big item, payments to individuals, families, and custodians of dependent children. It looks like some version of that is going to be included in this next round of relief. And I say that primarily because I'm hearing both sides of the aisle say that. What's the dollar amount? Don't know yet. We won't know until it's signed into law. But some level of direct payments similar to what we had this first round. Be on the lookout for that. Secondly, as I just mentioned to you just a few moments ago, I expect we're going to get some kind of extension in the unemployment benefits above and beyond, quote, normal. What does that look like? Frankly, again, it is very divided on that issue. There are some who want it to be at the same $600 level, flat across the board, that we've had here for the last several months. There are others on the extreme of not wanting any kind of bonus at all. And there's a whole collection of politicians with whom we've spoken and from whom we've heard who want something in the middle. So that's still being negotiated right now. But at this point, it looks like there's going to be something above the, quote, normal unemployment insurance benefits included in this next iteration. Stay tuned. It's a messy process, especially when you're looking at it, again, literally over 10, 15, 20 million people at a time. So stay tuned on that, and we'll certainly give you that hard data as we have it. Next big item in terms of payments that are going to be made or financial distributions that are going to be made because of the amount of unemployment insurance which has been distributed. And then in addition to that, the additional strain from a stay-at-home economy. And I know that might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but our states and our municipalities have had significant resources spent that they wouldn't otherwise be spending. In addition to that, states and municipalities have had severe reductions in sales tax revenue, which I'm sure you can understand from restaurants, sporting events, those kinds of things which really fuel their budgets. Those have, in many instances, completely gone away or at least been severely reduced. It looks like there could be some level of payments directly to states and municipalities. Again, a lot of negotiation on that. We'll see what happens in the final iteration. And then the next point along those same lines, similar lines, but slightly different, looking at payments being made directly to school districts for the obvious reasons. And I don't need to tell you, if you have school-age children like I do, I have an incoming second grader, an incoming fourth grader, school's going to look a lot different. If you have kids in college, college is going to look a lot different. And I'm not even going to get into the number of different iterations that are out there in terms of some on campus, some e-learning, some completely e-learning, some who are just going to try something for 30 days and see if it's going to work and then reevaluate. I don't need to tell you, a lot of confusion right now. Literally, I was just on a call just prior to this recording, talking with one of the larger public school systems in the country. I mean, it wasn't just with me, it was with literally thousands of other folks. And hearing about their concerns and what their plan was at this point, but that's the third time that I've been on this call over the last month, and it has changed each time. So a lot of challenge there. And when we're thinking about, and maybe you're thinking about, well, Joshua, what does this mean from an economic or financial standpoint? You may have heard me use these data points before, but it's very important to keep in mind. In our country, in terms of single-parent households where that parent works, or two-parent households where both parents work, that comprises 22 million families. Let me say that again. 22 million families live in a household with a single parent who works, or with two parents in the household and both parents work. When you look at the economic ramifications of what the go back to school, go back to college process looks like, and if it is significant, if not completely e-learning, you're literally talking about millions of families who are going to need to look very differently at how their week goes together. Does that mean that one stays at home? Does it mean that they're looking for some kind of flexibility from their employer? Does it mean they can't go to work at all? All of those things and more variables are in that equation. So we're looking at that Again, setting aside the emotional, political aspects of that as much as we can, but purely from an economic and financial standpoint, it's going to have a huge impact. And we're going to see what that's going to look like. We got a little taste of it here back in the first quarter of this year when we were first in the lockdown kinds of procedures and schools were taking kids off campuses and moving to an e-learning platform. We saw a little bit of it, but that was perceived to be more temporary. Now we're looking and talking with folks and with school districts and with colleges and universities who are saying at least until Christmas and maybe the entirety of this year. So there are going to be some financial and economic impacts from that. Can't legitimately quantify them at this point because what we saw in the first quarter of this year is that a whole bunch of folks who normally could not work from home could now, and they've adjusted in terms of their professional life, and businesses in terms of their expectations of their employees have adjusted now to allow for some of that. So it's not all dire straits, but it definitely is going to be different from what it was before. So we're watching those variables very closely and looking at, again, the large algorithm of what that means economically for us here in the US. So stay tuned as far as that's concerned. Last big item, when it comes to the legislation, has to do with what additional programs, as I mentioned, are going to be put in place for our small businesses or expansions of current programs for small businesses. I don't need to tell you, if you're a business owner who has been affected by COVID-19, maybe you're a manufacturing facility who has had to shut down temporarily or maybe permanently, and if you are working, what kind of safety precautions are in place? I mean, a significant amount of expense that there's no way anybody could have predicted, but now is a part of our common thinking, if you will. And what does that mean from a long-term ramification standpoint? So we know, again, from discussions on both sides of the political aisle, there's going to be some allocation made in there for small businesses in this next relief bill. So stay tuned on that. Like I said, you're going to hear more from us as we have hard data on that. You're going to get emails. I'm going to be making some new videos just to give some of that hard data and wanting to get that out there to you, again, in the most relevant ways. All right, market-wise, how have things been going? Well, I'm sure you've seen that we had a significant positive move in the second quarter from the lows that we experienced in the first quarter. Now, you may be thinking that we should just be cheering and that, sunny days are here again. Well, that may be true. I'll tell you internally here at Oakwood that one of the things that we're watching is to look at the market fundamentals for how things are going to be as we get into the fall and into the winter seasons. Not to say one way or the other, certainly we're not predicting anything from a market standpoint, but I will share with you from a market history standpoint that significant moves down in a short amount of time are just as unnatural as significant moves up in a short amount of time. So I'm not wanting to look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm very thankful for the kinds of returns that we had here in the second quarter. And there are and continue to be segments of the economy and industries which are thriving during this time of COVID-19. I don't need to mention the names to you. You probably can say them with me. It's Amazon, it's Apple, it's Facebook, it's Google, who have done Netflix. My goodness, how many shows have been watched on Netflix during this time? So there definitely are some factors in there and some companies and industries in there which continue to thrive. So I'm not taking away from those at all. However, when we're looking at the whole ocean and we're looking at the companies and industries that are doing well and those that aren't doing so well, how does that look in aggregate as we come in here to the third quarter and then the fourth quarter of 2020? And then the big bogey in the room, and I don't need to tell you this because it's going to get noisier before it gets quieter. We obviously have the presidential election coming up in November. I'm not looking to make any political commentary of any kind other than to say that there are guesses, if you will, that are made by the markets based upon who might win, who might not win in the short run, which will affect the market in positive and in negative ways. What we do know, though, is that generally speaking, who's in the chair of the presidency, either him or her, in the chair of the presidency, it does have short-term impacts in terms of emotional movements, but generally speaking, as we've talked about, markets move like waves on an ocean. They move more in trend lines than just in herky-jerky movements of the moment. They do move a lot in the moment, but when you look at those on trend lines, those don't tend to hold unless you're looking at something which is more prolonged. And again, with presidential elections, sometimes the market loves it, sometimes the market doesn't, and it's important to keep the plan in mind of where you want to be. If you'd like to take a look at, and we've talked with a number of you, but if you'd like to take a look, your allocations, how they're going together, how this all goes into the mix, you know I love to hear from you. I'm always happy to talk about the markets. I'm always happy to talk about the craziness that we're seeing from a political scene. And if you want to talk about more important points like where your favorite vacation is, or whether we're going to play professional football again in the same ways that we used to do, you know I love to talk about that kind of stuff as well. Again, hear from me. Thank you so much for your patience and your willingness to engage in Zoom calls and phone calls when I would much rather be with you in person. It is just an interesting time, and we will continue to get through it. I have no doubt about it that we're eventually going to get to the other side of this historic season. But it's going to be challenging along the way, and we know that. And for many of you, we've been through challenging times. We know what it looks like, and we anticipate that we're going to get to the other side of this one as well. In the meantime, as you know, at any time and for any reason, please never hesitate. Send me an email, give me a call. We'll get on one of these Zoom calls, or I'll send you a video, or whatever may be the most desired means of communication with you. I always enjoy hearing from you, so please never hesitate to do that. Well, friends, as you know, when I'm done with what I have to say, I like to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to draw this to a close. And like I said, at any time, please always feel free to reach out to me. I always enjoy hearing from you. Looking forward to talking with you again soon.